Welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? Welcome back to episode number 99 of the podcast, where we get political solutions, find political solutions without political bias. That's what this podcast is all about. As you guys know, we are back to a consistent schedule of a every Monday and Thursday podcast episode drop, 8 a.m. EST. And of course, if you want to find the full video versions of the podcast, you can find them on the Roku app on Pod Nations TV, where you can find the full video version of this audio podcast. Now, let's dive right into it, of course. I'm going to go over some current events. There's a lot of things that took place that I kind of wanted to talk about. The week after this upcoming week, I might start talking about the Biden and Trump election and talk about what they've both done as presidents. But until we get there, let's talk about some of the things that people are kind of going wild about. First things first, Russia and Ukraine. Now, apparently Russia is advancing in Ukraine. Russian troops capture 2 villages in eastern Ukraine, marking their largest gain since taking Advika in February. This comes shortly after the U.S. approved a $61 billion aid package for Ukraine, including ammunition and weaponry. However, it may take up to 2 months for the weapons to reach the front lines. Ukraine is currently rationing manpower and ammunition, with only 1/6 of the ammunition available to Russian troops. Additionally, Soviet-era anti-aircraft missiles have run out, leaving Ukraine vulnerable to Russian airstrikes, particularly targeting Kharkiv, the second largest city with a population of 1.3 million. The U.S. also has imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia after formally accusing it of using chemical weapons against Ukraine. The State Department said it had made a determination Russia has used the chemical weapon chloropicrin against Ukrainian forces in violations of the Chemical Weapons Convention, the CWC. Chloropicrin was widely used as a chemical warfare agent in World War I, but is no longer authorized for military use. The State Department added Russia had used tear gas in violation of the CWC. The statement tallies with Ukrainian troops' testimony of encounters with gas and other irritant chemicals. Nearly 300 sanctions were announced against companies and figures in China, Azerbaijan, Belgium, Slovakia, Turkey, and the UAE for their support of Russia's war in Ukraine. This is interesting, of course, because Russia doesn't have a lot of support from mostly like the Western countries. And this isn't the first time where Russia has been accused of doing things that is out of convention in terms of attacking their enemy. I think there was another case brought upon Russia in terms of using, I believe, either something in relation to sound or lasers. I forget specifically, but that was a big thing as well. So I'm going to keep my eyes on this conflict. It seems like Ukraine, with what's going on, is desperately in need of certain material. But if Russia is going to be basically accused of using chemical weapons, this conflict can become bigger than what it was meant to be. We've been trying to end this conflict for so long, and I guess the general assumption regarding the conflict is as of right now, either Russia or Ukraine need to call it an end, because there's really going to be no winner in the long run. But we will see. With the presidential election around the corner, what Biden or Trump will do is up in the air, because we don't really know if they're doing certain actions in support of Russia and Ukraine or in support of their election. And I'm sure Biden in particular, because I believe Trump is probably in the side of leaving the Ukraine and Russia conflict. Biden in particular is in an interesting situation because, yes, we understand Russia and what they're doing, but the general public probably is perceiving the fact that Ukraine is not our ally and don't really understand the influence of Russia, the fact that we're giving them money as a bad thing. So, how far will Biden go? I'm curious to see. Now, I want to go into the Israel Palestine stuff. I'm sure you guys are aware there's so much going on, but I want to start it off with the fact that the House of Representatives passed a bipartisan bill to combat anti Semitism in regards to these pro Palestinian protests that is happening all across the country. I'm sure you've heard of it happening on campus after campus after campus. It definitely seems that the Palestinian crowd has completely enamored the youth and the college students who don't really know anything about politics, but have a very surface level knowledge of being not necessarily radical, but definitely revolutionary. So I'm not surprised that this is happening to an extent, but the current PR of Israel and their recent actions doesn't bode this in the right light. I mean, if Israel didn't bomb the World Central Kitchen, and if Israel wasn't so bent on invading Rafah, I'm sure this wouldn't have happened. But because they are, this is happening. That's what I personally believe. But let's talk about this new Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. So the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act would mandate that the Education Department adopt the broad definition of anti-Semitism used by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, an intergovernmental group to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The international group defines anti-Semitism as a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. The group adds that rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism include such things as calling for the killing or harming of Jews or holding Jews collectively responsible for actions taken by Israel. So this is very huge. I'm very curious to see what the Democrats, the people from the Senate in particular, do moving forward after this act seems to have been passed from the House of Representatives. But that all plays into the bigger picture. We'll talk about this more, whether or not it get passes or not. But the bigger picture and what this all revolves around is the conflict between Palestine and Israel. So let's talk about what has recently been going on. Of course, we have the Hamas delegation to visit Egypt, discussing ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. And the World Central Kitchen is a plan to restart, as of right now, operations in Gaza. So it's kind of insane how the conflict started out with people, for the most part, greatly in support of Israel due to the October 7th attacks that are widely considered a terrorist attack against innocent people. Now, because of the actions of Israel, their aggression into Rafah and the attack on the World Central Kitchen, and a lot of, I will say, accusations and allegations of attacking innocent Palestinians as well, Israel is definitely losing ground, and Hamas taking a step towards quote unquote peace is an interesting situation that Israel finds himself in. The U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken urged Hamas to accept Israel's latest proposal for a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the release of some hostages. The proposal reportedly involves a two-part plan, with Israel seeking the initial release of 33 of the roughly 130 hostages remaining in Hamas captivity, down from an original demand of 40. Blinken's comments came on his visit to Saudi Arabia, the first stop on his latest Middle East trip over truce talks, as a Hamas delegation met with Egyptian mediators in Cairo. Hamas previously said it seeks a full end to the war with Israel and the removal of Israeli troops from Gaza in exchange for the release of all hostages. Separately, Israeli leaders are reportedly concerned over the possibility of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Netherlands, preparing to issue arrest warrants, including for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The ICC has been investigating possible war crimes committed by both Israel and Hamas going back to 2014. Now, this is huge news, of course. Now, there is rumblings of potential peace. There's rumblings of potential releases of hostages. But when we take an even further step back, the ICC can make a huge and bold claim in regards to this conflict. We know as of right now, Israel's in a weird state where they're losing a lot of momentum and a lot of support because of their aggressive actions, not only in around the world, but also in America with all the Palestinian protests, but also in their own country with protests going on in Israel as well. So this is very huge as they keep their eye on this. And this might actually, hopefully, put some pressure on both Israel and Hamas to finally end the conflict. But we have to keep our eyes on it and see what happens moving forward. I think we can all honestly say that there's no winners and losers with the conflict. Hamas, Israel have been doing some terrible things on both sides. There's no true good and evil when it comes to this situation in terms of these two sides in particular. You can pick out evil actions, you can pick out evil actors, but ultimately there's no moral good and bad. So right now, what we need to do is move forward in a state of peace. Something big with Hamas and the proposal that they're trying to make is make a Palestinian state, but it's going to come to Israel and Hamas to figure out, one, what does that mean, and two, how much land Israel's probably willing to give up. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. Next, we got Iraq's parliament passes law imposing a 10 to 15-year prison sentence for same-sex relations and 1 to 3 year sentence for gender transition surgery. It also bans any organization that promotes sexual deviancy, imposing a sentence of at least 7 years and a fine of no less than 10 million dinars, about $7,600. It's always interesting to me that there are people who try to support the Middle East to an extent, but also there are glaring values that are completely disconnected. And I'm really looking at the left, and this is another example because obviously the left is very much in line with LGBTQ rights, and this is complete contradiction of said thing. If you go down a rabbit hole and go down like the values of the people that they support, I'm very curious how much the left will continue to support that the side they're supporting. And I'm not really trying to call them out in particular, but I'm trying to find out exactly the reason behind their support. On a very surface level, I understand you want to help the unfortunate. You have this Robin Hood type mentality. You want to help the people who are minorities. You want to help the people that are underprivileged. You want to help the oppressors against the oppressed. I get it. It's very fairy tale-esque, but I understand trying to be this good guy because you're young and ignorant. And ultimately, the people who have this type of ambition tend to see themselves as some kind of savior. And that's just the honest truth. I'm not trying to come at you. In reality, you got to understand the nuances on why things are happening the way they are. Can you find evil people? Of course. But in situations where your values and what you're trying to propose, it won't work across the board because what you want to protect and what you want to support doesn't necessarily align with the people you're trying to protect and support. I just want to throw that out there. Another thing we have is a poll in regards to Trump and Biden supporters. Now, here's the poll in regards to the information that Trump supporters basically consume and what Biden supporters consume. And I'm going to kind of go through it. I think it was very interesting to see this. And I'm curious on your opinion in regards to this as well. Now, the people who don't follow political news at all, like they don't look at it to get their information about their candidate, basically, or any other material. We got 27% of Biden supporters not consuming political news at all. That's honestly too large of a number. Like, I think if you have support for your candidate, you need to at least be consuming some type of news. 27 is, in my opinion, too large. Honestly, I would be only okay with less than 10%. But what really blew my mind is Trump supporters are at 53%. 53 of these ragged Trump supporters don't follow political news. That's over half of you guys do not follow political news based off this poll, based off this survey. That's insane to me. But you guys are so devoted to your positions without knowing actually what is going on, which I'm not surprised about. But let's talk about the people who actually follow political news and what outlets they consume from. Well, let's start off with YouTube/Google. I think this is mainly just YouTubers, right? Get your information from YouTubers. 55% of Trump supporters get their information from YouTube. Again, I'm not surprised, of course. And 39% is Joe Biden. So both are decently large numbers. One is much above half of the Trump supporters, but one's pretty close to half in terms of 39% as well. So that's nothing to slack at, of course. YouTube is the new wave. My only criticism with YouTube in particular is that it can put you in some type of echo chamber because of how the algorithm works. I've become very critical of the algorithm. In terms of entertainment, I like it. But in terms of important information that is very impactful, such as politics, I don't think an algorithm is good at all. I think it's actually very damaging. I do think we need to change how the algorithm works when it comes to politics and when it comes to other information in terms of growing the country, growing your lifestyle, whether that's economics, whether that's voting. It doesn't really matter. I don't really have to go into it right now, a podcast episode for a different day, but I'm not a fan and I do think it's damaging. So 55% of Trump supporters and 39% of Joe Biden supporters looking up this stuff, for the most part, probably looking up stuff that reinforces their opinions, is not surprising to me. 53% of Trump supporters get their political news from cable, and 45% of Biden supporters get their news from cable as well. Interesting. This is more local politics. I actually respect this quite a bit, getting your information from like local politics. You probably will still get the big media company channels. I mean, this is not surprising to me that this is still relatively large numbers. Social media in general, 46 Trump supporters, 42 Joe Biden supporters. There's no big difference between the two. Social media is the new age. I can criticize both Trump supporters and Biden supporters for getting a whole lot of your information from social media. But I mean, that's what's bound to happen, especially with what Twitter is. You can get an instant trending report from Twitter, go like, oh, you know what's happening? The easiest way to find out what's happening is go on Twitter and go to the trending page. So I'm not really upset at anybody, but I would recommend people kind of take the next step to figuring out what exactly this information means and the context behind it. Next is digital websites. These are the people that take that extra step to an extent. They go to the actual websites of the material. 39% being Donald Trump and 49% being Joe Biden. I think we're seeing the kind of trend on like the type of people Trump supporters tend to be and the information they get, and Biden supporters, of course. And it's not a jab, it's just reality, right? It's just how it is. A lot of Trump supporters get very surface level knowledge and don't really know what's going on. So that's just the reality of the situation. Next is national network news. So I'm guessing this is mass like cable, the big media companies. 35 Trump supporters. Of course, Trump made everybody believe that all the media is terrible. And 55 Biden supporters. Not surprised. And lastly, newspapers. 21 Trump supporters, 21% get their information from newspaper, and 70% of Biden supporters get their information from newspapers as well. Nothing about this poll really surprised me. I think it highlighted something. And I want to be very clear. I'm not a Democrat, nor am I really a Biden supporter. But it's very clear to me the type of people I've seen from Trump supporters versus the type of people I've seen from Biden supporters. But again, you can look up this information on your own. What does this say to you? I'm curious. But that is all we got for today's podcast episode. Tune in Thursday, 8 a.m. EST to listen to another episode, of course. I will continuously be critical of Trump supporters because of what I've seen from them the last few years. And I'll be critical of Donald Trump as well. But don't get it twisted. I'm very critical of Joe Biden too. And what I've seen from Joe Biden and his competency as well. I think these are very obvious things to point out that are very warranted too. I do think we need a better representative voting system. I think we need better representative candidates. And I do believe that the value of the third party is the future of politics, and social media can be that. Well, I mean, we see what RFK is doing right now, and he's becoming a legitimate threat to Donald Trump. Donald Trump calling him out on his own social media website. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Tune in for the next episode. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.